As the Prime Minister announced an easing of lockdown restrictions earlier this month, Boris Johnson also looked to the future.
Though the UK will be changed by this experience, I believe we can be stronger and better than ever before, more resilient, more innovative, more economically dynamic, but also more generous and more sharing.
Young people are amongst the hardest hit during this lockdown, but they'll also be a vital part of the economic recovery. Well, joining me on the Daily podcast to discuss more on this, we have Nigel Morris, who's president of the charity Working Options in Education, supporting young people, and 25-year-old Timo Armoo, who's the CEO of Fanbites, an influencer marketing agency. Well, good to talk to you both. I mean, I'd like to start with the overview, and Nigel, give it to us. We've had numerous reports now, predictions, all of them dire, and all of them pointing out that young people are amongst the hardest hit during the lockdown and what is going to come afterwards. I don't know, we've had the Institute for Fiscal Studies, the Resolution Foundation, so many others. Just sketch out the scenario as we see it from this point.
Obviously, the employment market is in crisis currently, with literally millions of people in furlough, having been made redundant. But the key thing is that a million new young people will hit the employment market in the summer, leaving education, from school, from college, from university. And the number of studies, as you said, show that probably 650,000 of those will remain unemployed. And the Prince's Trust actually did a survey at the weekend of 1,016 to 25s. 50% now think getting a job is quote unquote impossible. 33% think that everything that they've done to date is going to waste. So what we know about, especially a number of studies after the financial crisis, is long-term mass employment is not just a blight on people's lives, but it's a blight on society as a whole. And we actually have to do something and make a really positive intervention to stop that happening.
Timo, from the Gen Z viewpoint, and given your own experience, do young people also have a say in their own future in this environment? Is what I'm saying, is there things that people can do to prepare for what lies ahead?
Yeah, Dermot, I think one of the things that we've seen is almost this balance between people feeling very fearful, but then also people almost taking it as a call to arms to go, well, we've done a lot of the work and now we're just about to enter into the workforce, and then this happens. And there is a sense of actually almost fighting against it through the tools that we have already been brought up with, i.e. social media, digital. I think people are starting to use, like social media to build their small little businesses or online stores. And I'm starting to see, if you'd asked me this question maybe about, I don't know, if you'd asked me about a month ago, 6 weeks ago, I would have said it's all dire right now. Like people are just, jobs are being rescinded, people are being put on furlough. But I think what's starting to happen now is just a bit of a sense of responsibility that I'm not going to let this get me down. I'm not going to let this beat me. And then I'm actually going to use the tools that I have, social media, digital, online, e-commerce, to basically build something for myself, but also to equip myself with more skills. I'm seeing a massive influx right now of people who are, for example, learning how to code, right, on sites like Code Academy or Khan Academy. So there's definitely a big sense of responsibility that is emerging from when 6 weeks ago it was just like, just complete chaos and depression there.
Yeah. And Nigel, I mean, taking what Timo says there about putting tools in people's hands, the government can help do that as well. What are you advising? What are you saying the government should do? The furlough scheme, massive, unprecedented, but after all, it's only a sticking plaster, a mighty big sticking plaster, and expensive one, of course, but it's reactive. How do they get ahead of this? What can they put in place now to deal with the problem that we know is coming?
That's right. And building off what Timo's just been saying, we, as a charity working options in education, we started 9 years ago making direct interventions, in the aftermath of the financial crisis, in 16 to 18-year-olds, and as they made their transition from education into work, to build employability skills, to build life skills, to help them create a new future and actually fulfill their potential. What we found there was making interventions that are inspirational, making work feel aspirational, talking to them in their language, setting opportunities in not just their language, but in a form that they would understand, had an exponential effect rather than, taking a much more traditional approach. And I think that's what the government have actually got to do now. There's already a number of recommendations starting to emerge about the kind of scheme that could be directed at young people. And a lot of them, I would say, are taking a more traditional perspective about what can we do to support and help. If you like, what can we do to put to use your language, a specific sticking plaster for them? We actually think there's an opportunity to do something a bit different. And we published something on our charity website last Friday, which is actually what the government could do, is create what we are actually calling a Gen C task force, something that is actually framed as something for them, something that actually inspires and motivates them to be part of a faster recovery and a better future. And a lot of that is actually using the tools that Timo was just talking about in terms of all the developments of technology that have been made in the last few years. Is transforming our economy into a more digital-based economy. And interestingly, what's happened in the last 2 months is that digital economy has accelerated at least 2 years. Everyone using Zoom at house party, everyone starting to work remotely, everyone shopping online. This is having a tremendous transformational impact now, but fundamentally will change the shape of our economy as we come out of recovery. And I think rather than taking a more traditional, what can we do to help support, if you like, a subsidy type approach, how do we take a much more demand-led? Actually, how do we get young people feeling and enabling them to be part of that faster recovery and that better future? And I think that's tapping into technology, but also just directly going to and enabling young people to help define how they can be part of that future.
So I like that, Nigel. So Gen Z becomes Gen C, but not making it a badge of shame, a badge of pride. I mean, it's too big a word to use, Timo, but is there some opportunity in this? And the same question to you I put to Nigel. What does the government have to do? It presumably has to be a pretty light touch from an entrepreneurial viewpoint such as yours.
Yeah, so if I think about it from experience, in the last 2 weeks on my LinkedIn, I probably had about no less than 40 people have come to me and asked, and the question has been, how do I start a social media business? And probably this is the most, I get these questions a lot, but this is the period where I've had it the most, where people are like, how do I start a business based off social media? How do I grow an Instagram page? How do I do this? And I remember about probably 6 years ago when Jamal Edwards, the founder of SBTV, he was, I think they did a big YouTube campaign about him, about how he, from his phone, had built a YouTube channel. And it was interesting because there was then a piece of data which showed that about I think it was between 6 to 8 months afterwards, YouTube suddenly saw this massive influx of people. Funny enough, most of them were like young black males who were suddenly starting their own YouTube channels, which Jamal Edwards was a young black male. So just there is a clear evidence of, if you make very visible if you make very visible, the people who are doing X, people would do that more. We did a bit of research where obviously as a company based off helping brands reach Gen Z, we asked our community of Gen Zers, we put out a survey and thousands of them replied, and 17% of them no longer think that traditional schooling is the only option. So you have a situation where because they're all at home and they are all homeschooling or Zoom learning or YouTube learning, they have come to actually almost go more with a path of self-education. And I think in terms of what the government can do, I think it's twofold. The first one I think is, again, as you mentioned, light touch approach. It can be a very simple thing where it's some kind of campaigns, something which shows the traditional way in which you thought that you could make a career is no longer the case. Here are other ways you could do it. The other thing is also really enforcing and really encouraging, I'd say, because I think right now it's hard to enforce anything really. Really encouraging that stat I mentioned about 17% of people no longer thinking traditional schooling is the only option. I think really encouraging the fact that instead of this whole, go to this room for 8 hours, 6 hours, actually there are other ways to learn. That there is a really big thing. We found out today, and I'm sure you guys also found out that Cambridge are gonna just go online until 2021, and it's like, well, if Cambridge can do that, then surely there is a lot of room for people who perhaps are not in that same position, but people to think, well, maybe there's a different way to the traditional schooling. I think that's a very low-hanging fruit, which the gov can really tap into.
Yeah. So, I mean, I'm really encouraged by that. So adaptability and flexibility as well. And Nigel, I just want to ask you, and you and I suspect are from the same generation, so we don't have an alphabet letter. We are just boomers. Okay, boomer. So I want to ask you, are there any lessons from history in that you and I suppose, got started in our differing careers back in the recessions, the dark days of the 1980s? Okay. No technology to grasp onto, but a pretty bleak employment background and an economic background. Is there anything from those times, just in the way of thinking, the way of behaving, that could act as encouragement?
I think it's a great question. The thing about the 1980s and why the employment was so bad was that it was a massive structural change as we moved away from a mass manufacturing background into a services background. What's happening with this recession and which could become a depression if we're not careful, is again, it's happening partway through a transition into a new way of working with you, which is the digital economy. What we know about every crisis, every recession, every depression is there is a recovery. It's how much you want to shape that recovery. And one of the reasons that we're so keen on this idea of creating a youth task force around Gen Z, and I love the idea of not just a badge of pride, but how do we create a brand that people want to become involved with, is because young people represent a fantastic resource for this. Because one, they've got energy, enthusiasm, right? And they've got that different skills that we have. The whole digital economy is natural and native to them, which is a lot of what Timo's just been talking about. What we know is transformational productivity over the next 10 years is going to become, with the adoption of technologies, the use of those technologies to the benefit of everyone. Right? And it's the different shape of the economy which young people can be part of and drive. And I do also think that this learning from previous recessions, there are always discontinuities. You never come out of a recession and go back to the way things were. They're always different. And in this recession, these changes in consumption behavior and mobility patterns are going to be with us forever. Right? It's not going to be. It's not going to just stay as it is now. But what it's not going to do is going to go. It's not going to spring back to what it was. And actually, the recovery, because our economic recovery is going to be contingent to a great extent on the health recovery, it means it's going to be quite patchy. But what it also means is, as we come back and start to get onto transport, go into pubs, go into restaurants, we start to go back into the office. If you think about it, the process of life is going to be slightly different, because we're going to need to be 6 foot apart. We're going to need to be wearing masks. We're going to have those different protocols. And some of those, you can already see them, will happen culturally, but some of them you can make happen. And one of the things examples I always think of at this point is London 2012, where everyone thought it was going to be an organisational disaster, but actually was brilliant because, in part, we had an army of young people, right, marshalling and helping people and helping those flows of mass people flowing around London in a much more seamless way. That's one of the things that we should be thinking about. How do we get just the physical movement of the economy going? And can we actually use and encourage young people to be part of that, as well as a new technology future and a greener future?
Okay, well, you know what? Talking to you two, the glass feels half full. Thank you to our boomer, Nigel Morris, and from Gen Z/Gen C, Timo Armoo. Really, really good talking to you. Plenty to